But, everybody's there, and we're going to trade, conversations, hopes and dreams. What will we find out here in the next few days? And then by next week, you have legal tampering and free agency and onward and upward. Here to help me figure some of this stuff out is my friend Theo Gremminger. You can see his fine work at Fantasy Points, and Theo is really omnipresent in the fantasy space and super hard worker. And he knows a lot, so that makes him a great guest. Theo, I'd ask you how you are, but we just talked 3 hours ago.
Yeah, I had an amazing guest on Fantasy Football Daily. It was actually Mike Schopp.
Yes.
So this is twice today, Mike. My lucky day, but we have a lot to talk about. I heard you talking about sort of the combine and the rumors, and we broke down some of them earlier today. It's a very exciting time for fantasy football and for NFL fans in general.
One question you asked me, I wasn't quite fully prepared for, and that's my fault because you always send me like a great list of what you wanted to talk about. But when you asked me where I thought might be a great landing spot for running back Jeremiah Love, the consensus top running back in this draft, I said the Vikings. Here's my excuse for saying a team with the 18th pick when everybody thinks he's going to go much earlier than that, Theo, is that I had it in my head from, I don't know, mid-November that the Vikings were bad. And so they'd be picking early. And instead they went 9 and 8 maybe and are picking 18th. So if I'd realized that Minnesota were picking 18th, I wouldn't have said Minnesota. You mentioned a few teams way up there, including Tennessee. And I wondered about the Giants. They're not a team that I think we talked about or that you mentioned. Maybe you did. But would they be – how high can this guy go is really the question.
I think as high as 3 overall. I think with a wide-open draft class, if teams are stuck with the pick and no one wants to pay them for it, I mean, like the Arizona Cardinals are picking 3rd right now, and I think most of the draft prognosticators are penciling them in to select guys like Francis Mauigoa, the lineman from Miami, maybe a Reuben Bain from Miami as well, offensive lineman, defensive lineman, and certainly on paper, a team like Arizona needs guys who can protect the quarterback and guys who can get to the quarterback. But I think in a wide-open draft class like this one, where there's very few quarterbacks that are going to be selected at all, right now it's Fernando Mendoza, an absolute lock to be in the first round and most likely the number 1 overall pick. After that, Ty Simpson could go in the first round or he could fall into the second round. I think that the combine matters a great deal to him. But the sort of the wide-open nature of the draft class makes Jeremiah Love a player who's really in play anytime you get to those, pick number 3, pick number 4. Tennessee's a spot where I do a show, an NFL draft show with Brett Whitefield over at Fantasy Points, and we both have sort of mentioned Tennessee as a wild card for selecting Jeremiah Love at 4 overall. It's a team that really needs an offensive focal point and a player who can provide support to Cam Ward. So they draft Cam Ward at 1 overall last year, would have an opportunity to put him next to a dynamic running back like Jeremiah Love who can catch the ball out of the backfield and is a home run threat, sort of in the mold of a Jahmyr Gibbs type who can break off these 40-yard runs. Jeremiah Love had 3 touchdown runs that went over 90 yards during his time at Notre Dame. I mean, he's a real home run hitter. And we've seen it. We've seen Bijan Robinson go in the top 10. We've seen Ashton Genty go in the top 10. So running back sort of back in play. It's in vogue in the NFL. So I think Jeremiah Love is right there when we're talking about 4 is sort of the realistic spot. You bring up the Giants at 5, and there's certainly a lot of Cam Scattaboo people out there. I certainly benefited from having Cam Scattaboo for a short period of time on a couple of teams. I know you did as well. He was very productive, but he was also a 4th-round pick last year, got injured this year, sort of has a violent nature to his game. Does the new coaching staff value him the same way that maybe Brian Dable did? Not sure about that. So I think they're an interesting wild card. But then you start getting a little deeper into the top 10. Washington at 7 seems like a wild card pick. Most people projecting them to select a top-notch defensive player. but I think Love is in play there. I think that would be an absolute home run for fantasy football purposes.
Mm-hmm.
Putting that sort of home run threat next to a mobile quarterback like Jaden Daniels, and it's an offense that really needs young skill position talent. They sort of have, churned through a bunch of these older guys. Their top skill position player is probably Terry McLaurin right now. So I think they're interesting. The Saints at 8 are very, very interesting. Kellen Moore sort of has that team on the rise. Again, you have mobility with Tyler Shuck, and the offensive line is getting better there. So I think he ultimately goes inside the top 8 overall. I would be very surprised if he falls into like the Minnesota range.
Yeah.
But I do think some teams like Minnesota might be in play to trade up for him. I think NFL teams are going to value him very, very highly.
How did Minnesota go 9-8? I have no excuse. I do the Purple Insider podcast every week with Matthew Collar, and they won their last 5 games and they're drafting after Detroit, the Vikings this year. So I missed that, I guess, even when I was talking to Matthew. So you think 8 is about the floor for Love? How do you think?
It seems about. I'd say 8 is about the floor. I could be wrong on this one, and I don't see this as a scenario. I mean, people talked about Bijan falling. He never did. People talked about Ashton Genty falling to like Chicago last year. Never did. Teams are pulling the trigger on these elite running back prospects, and Love is certainly there. And when you look at people like Brett Whitefield at Fantasy Points, people like Dane Brugler, they're all pushing him up into like the elite range of their big boards as well. Not just the mock drafters, the people who are just ranking the players 1 through 100. Love is very, very high on a lot of those respected people's big board lists. So I think the steam is absolutely there for him to go very, very highly.
What's ironic to me about this, Theo, is that the Raiders' gambit on Genty, I mean, it's 1 year. Even the Falcons with Robinson, who's been really good, they're not in the playoffs. Like, the argument against the high running back pick has been simply positional value. And are we at a point where we're salivating over these certain prospects and just not going to look at the fact that those teams haven't been good teams, even when their running backs have hit to varying degrees? So I don't know, like, that's what's weird to me about this idea. These are always bad teams picking at the top. And I think I'd probably recommend, you know the player better than I do. I'm hearing everybody say that he's excellent, but all these teams need more help than a great running back, I would say. Yet somebody's going to do it, and that's what's interesting, is that teams haven't gone the other way, apparently, in this discussion.
I think a counter argument could be made that the success of a Jahmyr Gibbs was had a huge impact on the Detroit Lions rising up and eventually winning a lot of games during the Ben Johnson era there. I don't know. The other way to look at it is the NFL, these guys don't fail. When you draft these elite running backs towards the very top, you'd have to go back to like a Trent Richardson to find a real failure when NFL teams invest like top 12 draft capital in them. So like Bijan Robinson, did he suffer through the Arthur Smith year, his rookie year, where maybe the usage was not quite what we wanted to see for fantasy? I mean, but now Bijan Robinson is looking like maybe the most talented offensive player in football. Gibbs was a hit. Ashton Genty, I think, is still a hit, just in a bad situation with that offensive line and quarterback play last year in Vegas. So I think there's kind of two sides to that argument.
Sure.
And again, it's the right draft for it, Mike. So this year, quarterback drives, the needle when it comes to NFL teams sort of maneuvering around drafts, and there's just not that there this year.
How many running backs? Could there be another running back in round 1?
The wild card name that I'll say no. I would bet a lot of money on no. But I think what becomes interesting is who gets drafted as the second running back off the board. And I think if there's a couple of players that I think could get that top 40, top 50 draft capital that we're looking for fantasy football purposes. Jadarian Price, who is Jeremiah Love's teammate at Notre Dame, is a player that I think NFL teams value a great deal. Also a home run hitter threat. He actually had a higher percentage of his runs go for 10 yards or more than Love did. I think NFL teams are going to value him a lot. He's an early entrant also has elite return skills. Someone could pull the trigger in that top 40 range for him, and I think the athletic testing measurables will help him as well. Jonah Coleman, who's a bowling ball type running back. He's, 5'8 and a half, 5'9", 220 plus, built like Doug Martin was in his Tampa Bay years. A very thick back who can sustain volume and also can catch the ball out of the backfield. Has sort of a fantasy-friendly profile in that regard, where he's a he can handle a high volume, but he can also catch the football. Sort of a back that might not leave the field. He's one that could end up sort of in that top 50 range as well. I'm not sure what his 40 time is going to be. Doesn't seem like he's going to be a burner in that sense. And then the name that's sort of rising up the boards, had a huge Senior Bowl. It's Mike Washington of Arkansas, who actually spent some time at the University of Buffalo, was also at New Mexico State, has had sort of a journey here to get to the SEC level. But he's going to test really, really well, and he has size, and he's coming off of a very strong Senior Bowl week. So the steam is there that if he tests well at the Combine, I think that he's going to become more of a day two lock. So Mike Washington, a name to remember as a riser.
Good stuff, Theo. Good to have some UB in the conversation. Jarrett Patterson in his turn from UB with the, 8-touchdown game that he had? And
Yes, he did. Jarrett Patterson, there was kind of a hive for him.
Yep.
A lot of people really liked him as a prospect. Never really happened. But, yeah, definitely good to see some Buffalo guys.
I picked him up last year even. I think L.A. Chargers for a minute when they had their injuries, and he got a little bit of work, but never was fantasy viable. With Theo Gremminger here from Fantasy Points, I'm Mike Schopp. Bulldog is out today. Let's talk quarterbacks, Theo, and not necessarily rookies. I mean, it's well established that Mendoza's the one. He's going to Vegas, and we'll see what happens with Simpson and a couple other guys. I talked to Cody Carpentier recently, who you know, and he said, in his opinion, after Mendoza, it's about 8 guys that'll be career backups. And, I made a joke about how that means they'll all be offensive coordinators by the year 2035. What the lack of quarterback, considered anyway, consensus quarterback talent in this draft means to free agency is interesting. You don't have, like we've had for a couple years, the number of teams, especially 2-3 years ago, that were drafting. We're seeing multiple quarterbacks go early. 6 and 12 picks the one year when it got to Nixon, McCarthy. A lot of teams are all set, but not all. You tweeted about Anthony Richardson when that news came down today. Do you think the odds are double digits even? That I like the idea too. He's exciting, but will he get into a competition somewhere? I mean, who knows? Maybe, but you've got him. You've got Kirk Cousins, even, who might be somebody that a team goes with. I wonder how you see the board at that position.
Yeah, I think that a couple of dominoes are going to start to fall when we get to the start of free agency. Daniel Jones, Chris Ballard actually talked about this. I think it was yesterday, maybe 2 days ago. Chris Ballard has said that the team wants to prioritize re-signing Daniel Jones as well as Alec Pierce. They're willing to use the franchise tag. He sort of insinuated that's not what they want to do, but that's in play. So once Daniel Jones, that sort of gets established with him going back to Indianapolis, I'd be shocked if he's not back in Indy next year. Then I think the next big domino to fall is Malik Willis. Malik Willis has got a very fantasy-friendly profile. He's still relatively young, I believe 26 years old now for Malik Willis, might be 25. But he was a pretty highly regarded prospect out of Liberty years back. Ran the 40 in like the high 4.5 range. And we saw him have that smash week towards the end of the season filling in for Jordan Love in that game against Baltimore. I think the market's going to value him a lot. Apparently the Miami Dolphins are very interested in Malik Willis. The Arizona Cardinals are interested in Malik Willis. And then the latest rumor is the Cleveland Browns have some interest in Malik Willis. And I think there's probably a number of teams that are a little cagier that are probably behind the scenes that are interested in him. So he offers you a little bit more than like the Kirk Cousin, Marcus Mariota types that are the ultimate bridge quarterbacks who would sort of keep the candle burning until a young player was able to take over. it's just a kind of a weird market for quarterbacks this year because there's a lot of quarterback needy teams and just so few players. So I think Malik Willis is really the most interesting one. And from a fantasy football perspective, he has the profile where if Malik Willis is starter next year, I would be very surprised if he's not towards the leaders in quarterback rushing yardage. And I think he's a little bit underrated as a passer. Again, a lot of these guys where we don't have a sample size on them as the starting quarterback, NFL defensive coordinators are really, really good at their job for the most part, and they can exploit weaknesses. But from a fantasy football perspective, Malik Willis will run for a number of yards, give you that fantasy football floor with his rushing production. So he's a very interesting one. I know a lot of dynasty managers are trying to accumulate Malik Willis shares sort of before he has a clarity with his landing spot, but I think he's very interesting. You bring up Kirk Cousins. I think he's interesting. There's just so many spots out there that there's going to be some surprising quarterbacks that are in the mix to start. Jacoby Brissett is still under contract. Mac Jones is under contract. You've got to think that those two quarterbacks are going to be at least teams are going to be calling on them as potential trade targets. The 49ers sort of have a nice card to play with Mac Jones. They could probably get a second-round pick for him. I think he would be very interesting. It's just sort of a weird offseason for quarterback, which makes a guy like Anthony Richardson in play. Despite him having a lot of flaws, he's still only 23 years old. He was the 4th overall pick in a recent draft. He's only had like 15 NFL starts, and a lot of them not so good. But fantasy production-wise, the guy has 10 rushing touchdowns in 15 starts. He's averaged over 40 rushing yards per game, which is a really, really strong number. So he becomes an interesting one. And even in like a catastrophic year for him, where he was benched and all that kind of stuff in 2024, he still was the quarterback 18 in points per game. So he wasn't like bottom of the barrel. If the situation improves, potentially he could be a guy that, again, lifts tides with his rushing production. So never say never for Anthony Richardson.
I want to say one thing about Willis before another question here in the few minutes left we have together, Theo, and that's I am the type to be like rushing to, no pun intended, to the Malik Willis prototype. Justin Fields, Trey Lance, Richardson. I'm rattled. And Willis is a different case because he's been in the league here, sort of maybe the way you'd prefer it as the player, other than the big money you get from being drafted so high like those other guys. But this gives you a chance to sort of learn, at least in theory. And Willis maybe has done that, but I'm kind of I need some oxygen from the hits I've taken with rushing quarterbacks that to varying degrees. I mean, Lance just never played at all. They've been losing bets in fantasy. Before we're done, the wide receiver class, it's a big topic in Buffalo always. You've got pretty much 3 names up top and then a couple more that might be mid to late first round. Do you have a favorite guy?
So, I mean, I'm a big fan of this wide receiver class in general. I think for Buffalo Bills fans specifically, I think that the big 3 are going to be gone by the time you pick. Jordan Tyson, Carnell Tate, Mekhi Lemon. Lemon potentially could fall into a range where Buffalo could maybe trade up, but I think that the way that he's trending, I would bet on like top 15, top 16 draft capital. I think the names Bills fans really want to pay attention to, Denzel Boston out of University of Washington, who's 6'4", 200 pounds plus, prototypical alpha on the outside. He's an interesting prospect for you guys. Still probably gone by the time you pick. The player that I love, though, is Casey Concepcion out of Texas A&M. I think he's absolutely electric. He's a player that I'm very high on for dynasty purposes as well as an NFL prospect. We've been projecting him to be a first-round pick for a while. I think that the market's starting to turn there. You're seeing him projected in that range where Buffalo is picking. I think if he were to become a Buffalo Bill, Bills fans should be super excited about that. And then the player that could rise up, sort of in different player, but it reminds me in terms of where he's at now versus where he could be at on draft day, sort of a Ricky Pearsall A couple years back, Ricky Pearsall ends up being selected at the end of the first round by the San Francisco 49ers. And for months, it was like Ricky Pearsall is going to be a second-round pick. Ricky Pearsall maybe goes in the third round. Just kept sort of trending up. Is Omar Cooper from Indiana.
Yep.
Elijah Surratt from Indiana was sort of the more hyped prospect all year. And Surratt's really good. But I think Omar Cooper is rising up, and he's got really strong yak ability. He's a very good route runner, and I think he could end up sneaking into the back end of the first round. Wide receiver out of Indiana. He's got an awesome highlight reel. Probably had the catch of the year in college football this year against Penn State, and I think he could sneak into that range where Buffalo's picking as well. But it's a deep wide receiver class, and I think the NFL is going to value this wide receiver class. So number of players in play for the first round, but I think those last three names are names that Bills fans should keep an eye on.
Yeah, 6-ish maybe. We'll see when we get closer to the draft what the betting odds look like for number of receivers to go in round one. We'll certainly be watching that here. Theo, Fantasy Points podcast, you do a lot. What are a couple of things we can look for that are maybe up? Including, of course, you and me. I mean, that's obvious.
Yeah, Fantasy Football Daily is the one that I'm recording very frequently. Mike was my most recent guest on that one. You can find Fantasy Football Daily anywhere you get your podcasts. Also, Fantasy Points YouTube. I'm dropping a ton of YouTube content over there for people who, I'm guessing people listening to this enjoy listening to stuff, Mike. But if you want to take a break from listening and watch, Fantasy Points YouTube. Dynasty Life is my Dynasty podcast. And then School of Scott with Scott Barrett. I'm co-hosting that one. I'm sort of everywhere. You can find my top 15 free agents for fantasy football. That's up for free over at fantasypoints.com. And also I have a top 50 overall rankings, which I'm updating, sort of a very early PPR ranking. I'm going to be updating that after the Combine, so you can check that out also over at fantasypoints.com.
All really smart people you mentioned that you work with there. I'm a big Barrett fan, to name one. Thank you, Theo.